Have you ever truly paused for a moment to deeply contemplate what you are actually made of? If you were to prick your finger right this second and carefully observe that tiny shimmering drop of crimson blood that emerges, you would be witnessing what is arguably the most incredibly sophisticated and complex transportation system in the entire known universe. But what the vast majority of us fail to realize is that single drop is, in actual fact, a thriving ecosystem that is fundamentally divided into two distinct parts. On one hand, there are the cells, like red blood cells, which are like the inhabitants of a city. But on the other hand, there's the medium where those cells live, a yellowish and transparent liquid that floods everything. And that liquid is what science calls plasma. We've been taught that plasma is just a secondary component, a kind of water with proteins that serves as padding for the cells so they don't bump into each other. And we've been told that it's an inert transport vehicle, functioning much like the heavy truck that delivers essential nutrients. And that is basically all it is. But let me tell you something very important. Those people are actually deeply and fundamentally mistaken. You see, plasma is definitely not just simply a form of water. It is actually a complex liquid crystal semiconductor material. It is the precise interface that connects your intention and your mind with your own biology. If your plasma loses its structure, your health, thank you, loses its voltage. And so you can visualize it with me. Let me use an example that all of us have at home nowadays. Think of a state-of-the-art television screen, one of those liquid crystal or LCD screens. When you look closely at that screen, what you are actually seeing are complex images formed by many thousands of tiny individual dots called pixels. In your own biological body, those microscopic pixels are represented by your living cells, but for those digital pixels to light up properly, change their color, and show you a perfectly clear picture, they need to be completely immersed in a specialized layer of liquid crystal that reacts instantly to electrical impulses. Well, it turns out that your blood plasma functions as exactly that kind of essential liquid crystal for your body. In other words, it's not the empty space between your cells, it's the active medium that allows your brain's commands to become biological actions. If that liquid crystal gets dirty or disorganized, the image of your health fills with noise, with spots, and eventually the screen turns off. If you prefer a more natural image, think of a precision aquarium. The cells are the fish, and for a century, medicine has focused exclusively on studying the fish. If it's sick, we give it a chemical substance, but they've forgotten the most important thing, which is the quality of the water. If the aquarium water is cloudy, if it lacks minerals, or if it's stagnant, it doesn't matter how much medicine you give the fish, because the fish will get sick again. Its environment is degraded. That water is your plasma. And today I'm going to show you how to take care of that aquarium so that your fish, in other words your cells, can swim again in an environment of maximum purity. Throughout this 3-episode series, we are going to take a deep dive together into the technology you inhabit. Today you are going to reclaim your forgotten sea, and you will understand. Why do you carry the ocean in your veins? Thanks to the discoveries of René Quinton, who was a French biologist that, at the end of the 19th century, challenged the entire scientific community of his time. You will come to fully understand exactly how that liquid structures itself much like a solid crystal, all thanks to the extensive current research being conducted by Dr. Gerald Pollack, right over in the United States. And most importantly, you will also learn to read the 3 coordinates of your health with Vincent's Bioelectronics. But this is only the beginning. In the second installment, I will make the leap from matter to energy so that you can discover that your cells emit. And a coherent light that the German physicist Fritz Albert Popp identified as the software of life. And I will later explain how the Russian Peter Garayev demonstrated that your DNA is an antenna that tunes into that light. Finally, I will close the circle with engineering. Of regeneration, that is, practical protocols to cleanse your filters and recover your biological sovereignty. Stay with me, because today we begin to clear the lens of your existence. To understand how we reached this point of forgetfulness, I invite you to travel with me to France at the end of the 19th century, a little more than 150 years ago. At that time, the world of science was experiencing a true battle of titans. On one side was Louis Pasteur, whose name you probably recognize because he is the father of the germ theory. His vision was clear. The enemy is outside, and it's the microbes, and these microbes must be killed. But in that very same setting, another fascinating figure appeared, a wise man who today has been unjustly relegated to the footnotes of history, René Quinton. Quinton was not a typical doctor. He was an observer of life, a physiologist and a biologist who wondered why, if life originated in the ocean, it seems that we have become disconnected from it. While Pasteur was completely consumed by the idea of the deadly nature of the killer pathogen, Quinton was instead obsessed with the surrounding biological environment. He explained his belief that disease is not merely an external attack on the body, but rather a direct and inevitable consequence of our internal environment having slowly deteriorated over a long period of time. And this is exactly where his groundbreaking research becomes a matter of pure precision engineering. You see, he postulated what he called the Law of Marine Constancy, and his thesis was that for our cells to function like a perfect machine, the fluid that bathes them, that is, the plasma we have already defined, much like our liquid crystal structures, they must consistently preserve and maintain the exact same physical and chemical conditions as those found in the original sea where life was originally born. And you see, it's not that they are similar, it's that in essence they are exactly the same. Quinton analyzed seawater and our plasma and discovered something absolutely astonishing. Both contain the 78 elements of the periodic table in the same proportions. In other words, we are literally a piece of confined ocean within a skin. And to prove this, before a scientific community that was skeptical of what he was saying, Quinton carried out an experiment that today might seem like science fiction to us. He took a small dog, which is still remembered in medical history by the unique name sodium, and carefully extracted almost all of its life-sustaining blood, leaving the poor creature on the very verge of death. Instead of transfusing blood from another animal, what Quinton did was inject it with treated and diluted seawater so that it was isotonic, that is, with the same concentration of salts as in our bodies. And what do you think happened? The animal not only didn't die, but within a few days it was running around. With more energy than before, its white blood cells, its defenses, had multiplied in this new marine environment. René Quinton had clearly demonstrated that marine plasma is a complex, self-programmable biological organism that simply requires the provision of the right environment in order to fully regenerate itself. And think again about the analogy of the liquid crystal display I mentioned to you a few minutes ago. If the precise chemical components of the screen's crystal aren't exactly right, then the electrons will be unable to make the necessary jump, and the visual image on the display simply won't form. Well, Quinton discovered that if your plasma lacks those marine minerals, your biological screen simply starts to fail. And it's not that your cells are broken, it's simply that the medium they float in has lost its conductivity. Quinton opened marine dispensaries, as he called them, all over Europe and saved thousands of children who were dying of cholera at that time, or from malnutrition. And all he did was inject them with this marine plasma. But of course, Pasteur's vision, creating substances to kill external enemies, was much more profitable for the emerging pharmaceutical industry than Quinton's vision, which basically consisted of keeping our internal aquarium clean and mineralized. What I want you to understand today is that your body is not a machine that breaks down by chance. It is a precision machine that needs its liquid crystal, its plasma, to be a faithful reflection of that original seed. And if that liquid is balanced, the communication between your cells is instantaneous, and health is the natural result. That's why understanding Quinton is the first step to reclaiming your sovereignty. It's about stopping being afraid of what's outside and starting to take care of the purity of what's inside. This inner sea is what allows the electricity, which I will talk to you about later, to simply flow without resistance. But before moving on to measuring or how to measure that electricity, we need to understand how this water organizes itself in an almost magical way near our cells. You know, having Quinton's minerals in our aquarium is only half of the story. Because for that plasma to truly be a precision machine, it's not enough for the ingredients to be there. They have to be properly organized. And this is where modern science gives us also a lesson in humility. Through the figure of Gerald Pollack, a professor of bioengineering at the University of Washington in the United States, who has dedicated the last decades to studying something that the rest of us simply took for granted: water. Pollack discovered that the water inside us does not behave like regular water, the kind that comes out of a faucet, or the kind you see in a bottle. Whenever liquid water molecules finally come into direct contact with complex biological surfaces, such as the intricate structures of your cell membranes or the folded chains of your proteins, something truly extraordinary and almost magical begins to happen within that microscopic environment. The water becomes organized. It stops being that chaotic liquid we know and call H2O and transforms into a perfect geometric structure, a kind of gel that Pollack called the fourth phase of water, or structured water. And scientifically, its formula changes to H3O2. This is the true liquid crystal I was telling you about a few minutes ago. Look, imagine a dance floor. If people move around without order, bumping into each other, it's absolutely impossible for a message to get from one side of the room to the other quickly. And that's what regular water would be like. But if all the dancers organize themselves into perfect synchronized rows, any small movement in one corner is instantly transmitted to the other. And that's what plasma does when it becomes structured. It becomes a high-fidelity conductor. Pollack calls this phenomenon the exclusion zone, or EZ for short. And it's called that because by arranging itself with such precision, this liquid crystal expels everything from its interior, any impurity, any toxin, or any residue. It's as if the plasma creates its own automatic cleaning system. But the most fascinating thing for our biological engineering is that, in addition, this exclusion zone, thank you, functions as a natural battery. When the crystal forms, a separation of electric charges occurs. The crystal is negative and the water surrounding it is positive. And here lies the key to your vital energy. Your plasma not only transports things, but it is also a battery that stores energy. If your plasma is structured, your body has more than enough energy to repair itself. And if the plasma loses its order due to electromagnetic pollution, heavy metals, or chronic stress, the battery gets depleted. And that's whenever that delicate liquid crystal layer of our complex biological screen begins to grow increasingly opaque, and that vital health signal starts to flicker and fade away, you should try to think of it as being very much like a sophisticated fiber optic network. For light to travel thousands of kilometers without getting lost, the fiber's crystal must have absolute purity and molecular structure. And if the crystal has cracks or impurities, the information simply doesn't get through. Well, your plasma is that fiber optic cable. It's not just a simple filler. It's the high-tech material that allows your brain's intention to reach every corner of your body without resistance and in milliseconds. And understanding that we are organized waters, it simply changes our perspective completely, because it's no longer just about drinking water, but about building a plasma capable of sustaining that order, because that order is what will allow us to have the necessary voltage so that life within us doesn't stop. But of course, in engineering, that's not enough. Just knowing that something works. We also need to measure it. We need to know if our precision machinery is operating within its optimal parameters or if it is about to break down. I'm sure you understand this perfectly. And to find that answer, we have to travel together once again to France in the 1920s. There, we will meet Louis-Claude Vincent, a hydrological engineer who received a fascinating assignment from the French government. He was tasked with investigating why there were such huge differences in the health of the population depending on which city they lived in. Well, Vincent began by analyzing mortality data from cities like Rion, where people were extraordinarily long-lived and healthy, and compared them with other cities like Clermont-Ferrand, where, despite being very close by, the rates of cardiovascular disease and cancer were, however, much higher. And in his research, he didn't just stay on the surface by analyzing only whether the water had bacteria. No. What he did was decide to apply the laws of physics, and that's how bioelectronics was born. And to help you understand, bioelectronics is the study of life through its electrical and magnetic currents. Vincent understood that living beings are fundamentally electromagnetic systems and that our plasma acts as if it were the wiring of Sereno, and he left us 3 master tools to be able to audit our health. The first of these tools is pH, which you've surely heard about 1,000 times, and of course, for example, in my previous video. But here, we're going to examine this entire concept as if we were all professional biomedical engineers. For the field of bioelectronics, the pH level actually represents the magnetic voltage of your body, and it specifically measures what we commonly call the pressure of protons. And what is the point of measuring this, you might ask? Well, you see, it turns out that protons are particles with a positive charge that determine whether an environment is acidic or alkaline. Measuring their pressure is fundamental because that force is what decides whether the chemical reactions in your body can take place or not. If the proton pressure is correct, your plasma maintains its liquid crystal structure. But however, if that pressure is not maintained, that crystal suddenly collapses inward, and your cells stop receiving the clear instructions they need to function. This is like the oil pressure in an engine. If the pressure isn't right, the parts start rubbing against each other and the engine seizes up. Just imagine. For a moment, picture a highway and the protons are the cars that transport energy throughout your system. For your body to be healthy, those cars need to be moving, flowing smoothly. But when the system becomes acidic, what happens is that we have an excess of protons. And then what happens is that those protons get stuck. It's as if a massive traffic jam forms on the highway. There are lots of cars, yes, but the highway is blocked and the information can't move forward. There is a strong presence of protons, but the conduction of energy is zero, simply because that excess has disrupted the order of your liquid crystal. And that's why a pH out of range is actually a traffic jam in your biological communication. But you see, the real crown jewel is RH2. To understand it, first I have to tell you about redox potential. In science, redox is short for reduction oxidation. It is the process by which molecules exchange electrons, and when a cell is oxidized, it loses electrons. This is like when a nail rusts outdoors and simply becomes weaker. Well, when it is reduced, the cell gains electrons and becomes stronger. RH2 is the parameter that measures that electron pressure. It is the data that tells us whether your plasma is charged with energy or if it is being depleted. Imagine that your body had an energy bank account and electrons were the cash. If your RH2 is low, between 15 and 21, it means you are in the savings zone, that your plasma is overflowing with electrons ready to repair your tissues and keep you young. But if the RH2 level of your body goes up, reaching a point above 28 means that you are officially in the red danger zone. This indicates that you are oxidizing far too rapidly, and as a direct result, you are losing your vital electrical charge. It is very much like when a battery has a constant current leak, slowly draining its energy over time. No matter how much you try to charge it, the energy escapes. And if you want an even more physical image, think of an apple. We've all experienced how, when you cut an apple and leave it on the table, after a few minutes that apple turns brown. And what you see is pure and simple oxidation. The apple is simply losing electrons to the oxygen in the air and is slowly burning. Well, RH2 is the specific value that indicates to us exactly how much protective antioxidant lemon juice you have in your blood plasma stream, to prevent that specific process from ever happening to you on the inside. A low RH2 is like having a perfect, invisible, and powerful varnish that keeps your tissues fresh, young, and elastic. But if your RH2 is high, it means that your internal structure is turning brown, rigid, and brittle, like that piece of apple you left forgotten on the table. And finally, the third resource is resistivity. This is the measure of the purity of your internal environment. Once again, imagine a 5-lane highway in this case. If the highway is clear, the cars, which are basically the signals from your brain, travel at full speed. And that means having high resistivity. It means your plasma is clean and communication flows smoothly. But if the highway is full of debris, trash, food scraps, cars and bags, the cars simply have to slow down and swerve around obstacles. Low resistivity tells us that your plasma is saturated with toxins or heavy metals and that the electricity in your nervous system is experiencing short circuits. Vincent demonstrated that if we then cross-reference this data, we get a perfect map with 4 zones or quadrants, and this is where the science becomes indisputable. The biological zone of life is the specific one that is characterized by being slightly acidic and very rich in electrons. And Vincent meticulously verified and confirmed that in this specific environment, that of perfect health, harmful pathogenic microorganisms simply cannot survive. And yet he discovered that degenerative diseases and cancer, for example, always appear in the opposite zone when the environment becomes alkaline and oxidized, that is, poor in electrons. That is to say, disease doesn't actually attack you out of bad luck, but rather it appears when your plasma changes its electrical coordinates and becomes a place where simply life already has a very hard time sustaining itself, and understanding this means stopping being a passive patient and becoming the chief engineer of your own life. Because also, you see, fortunately, these coordinates are not fixed. That is, we can shift them if we know which tools to use. You are not a victim of your genes or of bad luck. You are the result of the electrical state of your plasma. And if you clean the water in your aquarium and restore its voltage, the precision machinery you inhabit will work again as it did on the very first day. But of course, all this knowledge is useless if I don't tell you how you can start changing these numbers today in a simple, inexpensive, and right in your own home. So, at this particular point in time, the overall picture of our health becomes remarkably clear. If your pH levels fall outside of the healthy range, your internal communication is essentially stuck in a major traffic jam. If your RH2 level is running high, you are burning up just like an apple left out on the table. And if your resistivity is low, your life signal is full of interference. And it's a scenario that can be scary, I know, but the wonderful thing about being a precision machine is that if you give this machine the right replacement part, the system knows exactly what to do to reset itself. And that replacement part is not a medicine with complexity. It's simply the same environment where life was born. And now you might be wondering, but let's see how we connect Quinton's discovery with these numbers from Vincent. And this is where biological engineering becomes absolutely fascinating and, above all, very simple. Seawater is not just water with salt. It's a combination of electrons and minerals in perfect balance. And when you drink marine plasma, you are acting directly on your control panel. First, you are clearing your internal highway, because by introducing Quinton's 78 minerals in their organic form, you are doing two things at once. On one hand, you are cleaning the asphalt of heavy metals and toxins, which, as I mentioned, increases your resistivity. But on the other hand, that mineral balance is also what dissolves the proton blockage you had on that highway we talked about. It's as if suddenly all the lanes opened up. The pH pressure normalizes, cars start moving again, and the communication between your cells regains its designed speed. It's like replacing an old oxidized copper wire with a brand new one made of pure gold. Your plasma regains its purity and the signal becomes completely clear again. And secondly, you are lowering your RH2 because pure seawater is a massive donor of electrons. And it is almost as if a very generous friend suddenly made a massive $1 million deposit right into your personal energy bank account. And they managed to do it absolutely instantly. By flooding your plasma with these electrons, what you do is slam the brakes. You stop the fire of oxidation and return your terrain to that divine zone, to that zone of life that Vincent identified as the quadrant of perfect health. An environment that is slightly acidic and very rich in electrons. In this state, disease simply has nowhere to take hold. It is an environment where viruses and pathogenic bacteria simply cannot breathe. At this point, you might be feeling a bit confused, which I would also consider normal. I know you might be thinking, but wait, Jose Maria, you've always told me that grounding, that contact with the earth is vital because it gives me negative charge from the earth. So how come Vincent is now telling us that it's actually good to be a little acidic? Well, don't worry, I haven't gone crazy, nor am I contradicting myself. Just think of your body as that precision engineering, a true human battery. And you'll see, for a battery to work and provide energy, as you know, it needs two terminals. Well, the pH, which measures protons, is your positive pole, and the redox, which measures the richness of electrons, is your negative pole. When you do grounding or connect to the earth, what you're doing is charging the negative pole so you don't oxidize. What Vincent reveals to us with his quadrant of perfect health is that life flourishes when that negative pole is overflowing with electrons, but with just the right touch of acidity so that the spark jumps and energy flows. Therefore, it's not that one thing is good and the other is bad. No, it's that your battery needs both sides to be well defined so that the biological engine of your body simply doesn't stop. It's simply about finding the perfect balance between protection and power. And so that this stops being just theory and becomes your new reality, I'm going to design a protocol for you that will be your protocol for biological sovereignty. And it's something so cheap and accessible that many people find it hard to believe. But remember that the truth is usually something very simple. Well, the first thing you need is to get seawater. And nowadays, this is something easy to find in specialized stores. But whether you buy it or collect it from the sea, don't drink it as is, because its salt concentration is too high for our current cells. We have to make it, turn it into isotonic water, that is, bring it to the same pressure as your blood. And the recipe is also a very easy and precise one. You mix 1 part seawater with 3 parts weakly mineralized mineral water. And this is done so as not to alter the mineral proportion of the sea. For example, inside of a large glass you can simply pour in 1/4 of seawater, and then fill the other 3/4 with fresh mineral water. And if you don't happen to have seawater available on hand for your remineralization process, that is perfectly okay too. What you can do is use mineral water and add a few grains of unrefined gray salt, like Celtic salt or Brittany salt, or even a good spring salt. And your body, as a self-regulating organism, will detect those minerals and know exactly what to do with them to restore balance to your internal environment. Then you drink this mixture in the morning, preferably on an empty stomach. Do it slowly, savoring it, and let your salivary glands start informing your brain that the sea is coming home. If you want to further enhance its reducing effect, in other words, if you want to lower the RH2 even more, you can add a little, just a few drops, of natural lemon juice. Because lemon, although it seems acidic, actually has an alkalizing and reducing effect on the plasma that helps to further recharge your electron batteries. And by doing this every day, you will be performing precision maintenance on your machinery. You will be cleansing. You will be cleaning the glass of your internal LCD screen and recharging your batteries, making sure that the software of life can run without errors. You are no longer just a spectator, you are becoming the chief engineer of your own biology. And this, moreover, is only the first step of our journey. Because we have prepared the ground, we have cleaned the glass, and we have adjusted the voltage. But what exactly begins to happen when that liquid crystal starts receiving signals of light? How do your cells communicate? In the next video, I will take you into quantum biophysics so that together we can discover the storehouse of light you carry within and how your DNA acts like an antenna that tunes your destiny. And I'll finish, as always, by inviting you to move forward. Always forward. And remember, I read your comments.